I am going to explore what is unfolding beyond business as usual and bring some learnings to what I've seen in the front lines of what is evolving. To inspire your thinking, but also to get some feedback and hear some thoughts at the end of this session on your own learnings on the way, especially from those that have been on this for quite a while. I think that would be brilliant to mix that into the overall learning today. So shortly about me, what I do every day is to try to help leaders to go beyond business as usual, to co-create better business and a better future. You will be left with the slides afterwards, so I won't be going into more details here. You can check out my website and you can link with me, find me on LinkedIn if you would like to get to know me more. So I was thinking to get a bit more personal here, to give you a feeling of where I started this journey. It actually started 25 years back, but you know, as you grow older, you also grow slightly wiser, at least, you know, I'm hoping. So the things and the questions that have come to me over time is, first of all, how can I make a more meaningful difference in the world with whatever it is that I bring? And then what is going on in the world? What is the context that I can actually make a meaningful difference in? And how can I best utilize my experiences for the good of the coming generations? And then in the context that I work in, how can I help business leaders navigate this sustainability revolution, capture the potential and become a force for good? So these are all questions that have not been easy to answer. They have been going on for a long time. And you're going to see today some of the things that I picked up on the way. Now, one of the things that I've done is to utilize my background to actually, and network, to access and learn from the sustainability trailblazers and to help others accelerate their co-creation of a better future. And I've done that through diving deep into materials. I've studied 40 organizations. I've done 6 real deep dives into Patagonia, Interface, Unilever, IKEA, Lagerstedt and Oatly, quite different companies, but rather interesting to look into, and try to map back over time how their journey has played out, not only from a sustainability perspective, but in general, to see what's been going on and what we can learn from that. And I've also had a series of very interesting dialogues with senior leaders that has been on this journey for quite some time. So before we do anything else, we will need to start out with defining sustainability, because I'm hearing sustainability is not relevant anymore. We need to go into regeneration. Yes, regeneration, we will talk about that, but sustainability is far from irrelevant as we see it. So what the heck am I talking about? Well, I've chosen to use the Brundtland Commission definition, saying simply, which you who have been in this field for a long time already well know, that sustainability means meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. I still really think this is relevant for all of us. So in all of this, what is going on? And why is this topic that we're bringing up today so important? And as to what I can see, there are not only small signs, actually, we're talking about small signs of trends that you can see in business at the very vast horizon. This, guys, is not a small sign. This is a major wave, not the first, not the second, but a number of waves that are just coming in as the sustainability revolution is, just taking space and not stepping back, because this is here to stay and it's something we can't hide from, which I believe some have tried for quite a long time. And I especially like this quote from World Economic Forum. They say, like the digital revolution before it, the sustainability revolution promises to change everything. Yet, just as with digital, too many companies are moving too slowly and taking an incremental approach when there's really a need for a radical rethink. And I think they're spot on, because for those, for instance, Kodak, that looked into the digital revolution early on from an innovation perspective, but due to poor margins and other things challenging their legacy business, they decided not to pursue it. We've learned from that. Let us not do that again. Let us make sure that we actually learn to ride this wave and help others that are already, actually, there are a lot of laggards out there. Let's help those guys also on this wave to see where we need to go. Well, I thought this kind of speaks for itself, because I'm thinking for myself that, well, if this is so urgent and many of us started out 25 years ago, how come not more has happened? And I believe there is a large human factor here. We're busy. We're focusing on things that are short term. We're stuck in what I call business as usual. And we just believe that someone else will fix this. It's not up to us, it's someone else. But what we need to realize, that you guys who've been on this journey for a while also know, is that we are in unprecedented times. The two things that are really, really pushing this is, first of all, the GDP that has, over the past 2 millennia, shown not much of a development, but then suddenly exploded. And then the size of the world population showing approximately the same pattern. And realizing that a number of indicators regarding Earth systems and socioeconomic trends are actually showing the same type of pattern, that is exponential growth. And going to Singularity University, you will get told on their innovation training that, well, this is the way it is. And we will not experience change this slow over the next 100 years. Instead, it will continue increasing, right? Which is a huge problem, because we're talking about the resources, the infinite, the not infinite resources on a finite planet, right? So this massive footprint has left us in what is now called, or increasingly being called, the age of the Anthropocene. So what is that? Well, a period which us as humans and our activity has become the dominant influence on climate and the environment on Earth. And in several areas, we have already gone way beyond what are considered to be the ecological ceilings and the planetary boundaries. And also, we have a number of shortfalls regarding the social foundation, which Kate Raworth has pointed out so beautifully in her book, The Donut Model, which I can really recommend you to look into. What I think is so interesting, though, when I look into all of this, is that the world of business is surprisingly well equipped to co-create solutions for these immense challenges. We have, as a community, we have the ingenuity, the creativity, the innovativeness, and the resources that we can call forth, often so much better than other types of human organizations. So the question is why we don't do that. And the question is, what do we do when we still don't get the attention and interest from our senior business leaders? So how can we get the traction? If they're not open to listen to what we say, when we can show them the figures of what is going on and the science behind it and the sources behind it, what can we do? I've come to one very simple conclusion. For those of us that are still stuck in business as usual, the easiest way is actually to show them the money. And I'm going to ask you what we're talking about here. So with this simple question, do you know what the business potential in addressing this crisis is in US dollars? So just have a guess, quickly put in the chat. What are we talking about? Is it billions? Is it trillions? Or are we talking about less than that or even more? Just, Hannah, is something coming in or what's going on?
Oh, yeah, we've got a couple in now. 500 billion, 10 billion, 36 trillion. 2.5 trillion. We need some other brave people.
Yeah, another few brave souls.
Question from Julianne, how about the business risk that's inevitable if this crisis is not addressed? Video sent one just to me, so not everyone can see it, but he said 100 trillion.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think we just stop there and just get a feeling of this span, because we're talking about trillions, and how much is a trillion? That's hard to grasp, right? So we're going to come back to that. But look at this. We're talking about Accenture here saying that the transition towards circular economy represents globally by 2030 a $4.5 trillion opportunity. We're talking about another 10 trillion as to the World Economic Forum in three major socioeconomic systems: food, land, and ocean use, infrastructure and the built environment, and energy. We're talking about 12 trillions in a UNDP report from 2017, I believe, in four different systems. And then finally, we're talking about 26 trillion in opportunity. Can we see that? No, you can't, right? Wonder why. There it is.
Oh, there we go, yeah.
Which is the total sum of a transition to a more just, green and regenerative economy as a creation of financial value by 2030. And these are all huge numbers. It's actually so big, it's really hard to grasp what it represents. So I double-checked and tried to figure out what is then the GDP of relevant countries, the leading markets around the world. Well, we're talking about Germany, $5 trillion GDP, equivalent to the Accenture circular economy opportunity. We're talking about China at 15 trillion, the US at 21 trillion, and in between you have Japan at another 5 trillion. So we're talking about adding a number of more or less the biggest markets in the world on top. Not completely true, I would say, because a lot of companies will actually not be able to handle this transition and will probably, as Schumpeter said, go through a creative destruction. But still, the opportunity is vast. And interestingly, I am seeing in the material I've gone through that there seems to be a paradigm shift on its way. And you already know business as usual, I'm sure. The old business paradigm that we've been in since the 70s, where we see short-termism driven by the financial markets. We see the purpose of business being to maximize short-term profits for shareholders. We have the take, make, dispose logic, and CSR is used to reduce risk and safeguard our reputation. And we may collaborate, but we do that in industry associations to some extent. The evolving paradigm I'm seeing, without defining it into more detail here, is more long-term, even generational, encouraged by financial markets to protect long-term investments. And especially true when looking at a company like IKEA, for instance, that actually work in generations ahead. Another is that the purpose of business is to advance prosperity of humanity within the boundaries set by nature, which is a tremendous shift to business as usual. And we're also seeing circular, regenerative, and more equitable business and operating models being explored. Sustainability in this paradigm is a fully integrated part of the business, of purpose, strategy, business models, value chain, and offering. And we're seeing new models for collaboration based on mutual interest and the higher good, to create a better future. And I find that so inspiring and so extremely interesting. But I also realize that the shift here, or the jump from one side to the other, is extremely big. And most of us and most business leaders today have grown up in the old business paradigm. We don't have the tools to deal with the evolving business paradigm. So how do we do this? Is there something in between? And I suggest there is. So what I kind of mapped here is that new business logic evolving beyond business as usual. And some call it sustainable business. Some call it something else. What I'm seeing is a pattern that I call better business, where I see purpose-driven for profits, potentially a benefit corporation, or a certified B Corp. I see them having a long-term focus, not yet generational often. I see them create not only value for shareholders, but for stakeholders. I see an increasing focus on sustainable and circular operating logics, a larger focus on the business ecosystem instead of only the organization and its transactional business environment. And I see a larger focus on, when we talk about corporate responsibility, being purpose-driven or aiming to minimize the social cost and the ecological footprint. And then also sustainability becoming increasingly integrated into purpose and strategy, with systematic efforts taken to make the current offer more sustainable, more circular, and in opening opportunities in new value propositions, business models, and operating models. Super, super interesting. And the good thing about these is that there are a lot of companies already to learn from. And some of you who've been active for 25 years may know which they are. I'm going to bring up a few of them here for us to just look into. And so my first question for you is, of course, which are those companies that can be considered the top 10 to integrate sustainability into their very core? I pulled this from a 2020 GlobeScan sustainability survey after surveying 700 experts with that exact question, which can be considered to be the top 10 companies integrating sustainability into their core. I would like to ask that question to you, of course. So please give Hannah your ideas. Go ahead. What do we have there, Hannah? Can you give me a live?
First two straight off the bat with Patagonia, within seconds of you asking the question. Got Unilever, IKEA, DSM from Martin.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? In terms of when there's 700 experts, what was their background? And you know how they made the judgment? Because I think that's one of the challenges, isn't it, with any of these lists?
Yeah, as far as I understood, they're sustainability experts. That's the only thing I learned about from the GlobeScan report. And when they did the question they were supposed to answer was actually not best at sustainability, but best at integrating sustainability into their strategy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. We've now got Nestle, Interface.
Yep.
AkzoNobel, Apple. That's a pretty good spread, isn't it?
Yep. All right, let's leave it there. Thanks so much, guys. Let's see what the list says. And of course, you got Unilever there. Paul Polman did a good job. They actually were onto this journey already before Paul entered the firm. I would say they started out around 1995. I was actually there at the time. I had absolutely nothing to do with it, but it was interesting enough. Patagonia is definitely on the list. IKEA is on the list. Interface, I heard. Natura and company from Latin America. I don't think anyone said that. Danone for sure. Tesla, Nestle, Microsoft, and Lagerstedt. What I did here was to highlight a few of them, and those are actually part of the companies that I've been able to approach and go deeper into and look into their historical development, which has been tremendously interesting. And to that list, I also added another company which are not on this list, and that is, of course, then Oatly, that I mentioned earlier, I believe. So what I saw here, not only in these 5 plus Oatly, but in general in the mapping that I did, was that there seemed to be 3 playing fields that these guys are active on. And with playing fields, I actually mean systemic levels. So it's not only the organization and that immediate transactional system, but it's the outside business ecosystem enlarged and the world and society. And what I saw is also that they seem to do that along 5 steps, and they are not actually, what can I say? They're not chronological. It's not that you have to take one before you take the other. What I realized instead was that when this started out, they were all over the place, exploring different levels and not being very systematic about it. Today, they're much more systematic. Their strategies, when I look into them, are not designed like this, but I can pull from each and every one of their strategies to sort of come to this conclusion. And I also discussed with quite a few of them, what do you see? Can you see yourself in this? Is this how you work? And yes, it is. We recognize ourselves. And there are some learnings we have there. And one of the things I found interesting is that if we start from the bottom, you have this concept of laying a solid foundation. And you may think that that's something you do once, right? If you're new in this field. But for someone, for instance, working at Interface or anywhere else that have come far on this journey, you would know that this is something that never ends. It has a start. Someone needs to start it, right? But there is actually no end. You can continue working on this level as long as the company exists. And also, as you go along, demands actually grow, and you will actually need to turn up your activities in order to be compliant even. And then you have explore and innovate, which is us that are here today. That's where we feel most comfortable, probably. The next step would be integrating sustainability completely into the core. And that's what then the organization overall looks like. What these guys are also doing well is actually working on their larger ecosystem to actually help upgrade their practices. And I have a brilliant example that I won't mention here today, but that you can read about in the book, from a waste management company in Norway who actually decided to clean up their industry, which was not clean, if I may say so. That really sets the standard for how you can actually go about this. There are also another few examples that you can learn from. And then finally, we are talking about collaborating to change the world. And what I realized in the research was that many of the startups that I've been in contact with over the years, that's where they start their journey. They have this idea about changing the world, and they collaborate with others to try to make it come true because they don't have the resources themselves. But if a large company starts there without having laid a solid foundation, they of course get accused of greenwashing. So being a large player means you actually need to make sure that you have a solid foundation in place before you start communicating, at least when we talk about having made commitments to go on this journey and starting to show transparently your first results, right? So what I'm going to do next is go through the bottom three here, just give you a bit more of a feeling of what I'm talking about as part of this session today. So laying a solid foundation, defining that, I would simply say like this: working systematically, as you understand sustainability folks do, right? To understand and address stakeholder needs, conduct yearly materiality analysis, set ambitious goals, even moonshots, and develop and implement relevant programs to address identified challenges, ensure strong governance, and report transparently. And there are a number of examples of this in the book that I don't have the possibility to mention today, but what I think is most characteristic of the companies I've looked at here is the systematic approach in reaching moonshots or really ambitious goals. And here one company stands out as absolutely impressive, and that's Interface, who already back in 1994 committed to becoming the world's first environmentally sustainable and ultimately what they call then restorative company. And with the goals that they set in those days, they actually reached net zero carbon already in 2020 with some extra help. And also before that, I believe in 2019, net zero waste, zero processed water used, and much more. They speak very openly about that on their website, by the way. So feel free to go there. When we talk about explore and innovate, what struck me there is that the companies that I've looked at, actually, they're not on very many innovation lists. That's one thing that hit me. But what I saw is that they tend to not innovate from the useful tech approach. Rather, they look at the world's wicked problems, the the human needs at the impact business models, how we can use that. And then they apply useful tech or other useful solutions to actually solve those problems that are in the middle, in the sweet spot. And defining and understanding that potential sweet spot is really interesting. And of course, then you apply the same principles like you do in other cases. You ideate, prototype, experiment, and learn when you've actually understood where that sweet spot is and where you can make a difference. A simple example here, not going into details, would be IKEA, with a focus on exploration, innovation, and experimentation that they actually have on circularity, where they're seeing a threat to their current business model, which is built on a take, make, dispose approach, and obviously not sustainable. They're seeing that, can we somehow solve that through circular solutions, both offerings and business models? And they in parallel, and they're extremely open with what they've come up with so far. They talk about it, and they also share some of their principles online. If you look for IKEA circular solutions, I'm sure you'll be able to find some interesting things there to download. They also, of course, like any respected company nowadays, have an innovation hub for breakthrough innovation linked to, in this case, global trends and wicked problems, to a larger extent than I've seen with many others. And I think they're doing an extremely interesting job. Also something you can check out online, Space 10 in Copenhagen. So the last one I want to share with that before we go into a Q&A is integrating into the core, the last part of the organizational level. And why is that? Well, because here at this level, you really get the strategic guidance overall to take this completely seriously. You have it as part of your higher purpose. It's integrated in your values, your culture, your strategy, your business model, your offering and operating model. And all of the elements of the organization is built around that higher purpose. And I want to show you a company that I admire, have come to admire, I have to say, because they over the years have transformed from a business model, which actually belonged in business as usual, into something that is what at least to my mind, is what we would call a better business. They do not call themselves sustainable. They feel that they're still on a journey. They cannot be completely sustainable yet, and they're definitely not regenerative, even though they're exploring practices that are regenerative. What they want to do is to save our home planet. That's what they set out to do after having gone through a crisis in the mid-90s. And around that reason to exist, they have identified principles for what to offer, whom to offer it to, who they serve, where to operate, and then how to operate. And all of that works in harmony to actually deliver on their higher purpose, which I think is brilliant. More about that in the book as well. So with that, I'm going to close this part of the session, saying that you can find more information and resources on the author website, elisabetlagerstedt.com. Please go there, check out what I'm writing there about beyond business as usual and better business. And you can also sign up for a newsletter and download a test of a self-assessment of your organization. And I think, in the section of in the wisdom section, there is this final word of wisdom saying that the secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. I think as an innovation community, that is exactly what we need to do. And I think you can be a major force for good within your companies in actually driving this agenda. With that, Hannah, I believe we have come to the Q&A session, right?
We have. Super. Thank you, Elisabet. That was great. Lots of food for thought there.
For sure.
We've got a few questions have been coming in the chat, and I'm sure that more will keep popping in whilst we start. Do you want to stop sharing your screen so that we can...
Of course. Let's do that.
So I'll start with a question from Eugenio. Eugenio, do you want to come on mic and ask?
Okay, thanks for that, Elisabet. I think it was quite a very big picture that you put in our minds. You know that every day, because of this war that is raging on, we are hearing that most of the governments or big initiatives regarding SDGs are starting somehow going to the wrong direction. So my question was like this: people normally switch on their survival instincts, like companies, in terms of coping and managing crises. How do we make sustainability initiatives more long-term oriented and resilient? I think you touched that, but perhaps there are some interesting best practices to put in place.
Yeah, thanks, Eugenio. I think that is a brilliant question. And I think that is probably at the heart of this, isn't it? Unfortunately, there is not one easy question to that. This goes back, in my view, to our mindsets and how aware we are about what we see going on around us and what we believe our part of that is. And if we are not aware of what's going on around us, if we don't have a purpose that is higher than just earning money for shareholders, we won't get anywhere, actually. So from my perspective, and one of the things I'm working with is coaching of business leaders to help elevate mindsets, to help leaders see a larger perspective and how they can actually make a difference while doing good, not only for the larger good, so to say, but also for their own business. And when these things come together, I believe we can produce and see real change. Before that, I'm afraid, I think you're onto something there, saying it's down prioritized when other things starts, blowing. So I think it's crucial. Business leaders are crucial in making this become reality.
Elisabet, I mean that mindset piece is really interesting.
Yeah.
And it's a really tough nut to crack, and it can take a long time. Have you? I'm afraid I might be asking a difficult question here. Have you come across a kind of killer approach or a killer question or something that you found is really helpful at unlocking that sort of conversation with leadership teams?
I have, actually. And the good thing is we haven't discussed this before. So this is a brilliant question, Hannah. What I've discovered in running sessions and workshops with leadership teams, what I've discovered is that the first time they start thinking about themselves and their children in the future, and the future we're creating for our children, and actually write a letter to themselves or even to their grandchildren in the future about what they hope, about what you hope that your grandchildren will experience when they're 40 or 50 or when they get their own children. That's when something, just happens. Before that exercise, it's just words. It's simple words. And it sounds super simple, I have to say. It's not, though, because to get the guys in the mood to actually feel safe in starting to think about this, it takes some thinking before you actually you can't just throw it out and hope that it happens. But creating that safe space that is needed for this to actually grow is, I think, really, really important. And that can be done. So it's connecting with yourself and future generations and realizing what it is that we're co-creating and that you're part of co-creating that future and taking responsibility for that.
Mm. Yeah, that letter exercise is so powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
We've got a question from Beth.
Go ahead, Beth.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I thought it was really interesting. And I definitely like the idea of that, connecting with future generations. My question was just around when you were looking at the companies and the different sectors, and I think, we talk about a lot of those trailblazers that we see a lot coming through. And I was just wondering if you've seen in your experience or any research data you've seen around sectors as a whole that just are lagging a bit further behind. So I've got kind of my thoughts around some, I think, on maybe that, there's a lot going on there that perhaps more could be done. But I just wondered if there's anything you've seen that's more specific data around it?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, Beth. I was on that really early on when I started writing the book, because I was thinking there has to be a sector that is far beyond the others, that is leading the way, that we can learn from the rest of us, right? What I found out, which was really interesting, is when looking at ESG measures, for instance, there is no industry that, compared to others, bounds out as someone who is further ahead than others as to ESG measures. So, well, that's food for thought. And the other one I've been considering is, if you think about something that would be sort of a spiral or a vortex where things move really fast in the middle and then kind of slower on the outside, I think that's a better analogy, because there are companies in the middle of the vortex where things are going really, really quickly right now. And you can compare that to what happened in the digital revolution, when some industries, media and entertainment, for instance, were really, really fast to adopt digital practices. You can compare that to what happened then and say that, well, the energy industry, for sure, is in the middle of this vortex. They have been really, really slow, though, starting up, especially the traditional players, I would say. I was invited to give a short speech to the UK, to a UK Energy Association in 2015. And at that time, it was about customer insights. And I have to say that I was stunned about the traditional approach of the industry, not be so focused on the existing infrastructure, not seeing opportunities outside of that. So I'm not surprised that, even though it looks like on the figures that green solutions are growing so rapidly, which they are, the traditional energy industry is still pretty traditional. That's why I wanted specifically to deep dive into Lagerstedt, for instance, to look at what they've been doing. And there it's a matter of changing business model to a large extent, for instance. So, well, if you want to check what's going on, check out the energy industry. What's happening there right now is in the middle of the vortex.
Thanks, Elisabet.
Thanks, Beth.
To ask a similar question to that, you talked about the fact that you work internationally. So yeah. I'm intrigued to know if you see differences in that sort of appetite mindset that we talked about before, and also approach across different countries or regions.
Yeah, also brilliant. You're full of brilliant questions today, Hannah. I really love that one too. Yes, I actually see a larger difference on the international and country level than I do if you compare different industries. And I saw a brilliant report earlier today. I think I can enclose that in as a link if I find it again, where, of course, you have Scandinavia and a few more markets on the top. You have a group that are, they're light green, and then you have laggards falling behind. And I think that when looking at the interest that my book has, where that book is where I perceive interest, it is not from the markets that are lower down on that list. Actually, the interest is coming from Scandinavia, possibly the US, and some of the more developed and developed markets throughout Europe. Is that enough? No, it isn't, right? It is not enough because a lot of the markets in Asia is now speeding up their development, and they have been over the last 20 years. And of course, we need to help share best practices and good practices to make sure that with the increase of GDP, you saw what happened there. When GDP and population increases, we extract more resources. And ultimately, again, on a finite planet, we need to help each other to solve this problem. We cannot work in isolation. I'm not sure whether that answered the question, but sort of, right?
Yeah, no, and it'd be if you can find that report and send the link, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I'll try to find it again.
Interesting. We can take one final question from Eugenio.
Go ahead.
Okay, not sure if it's a very relevant question, but in terms of circular economy, we know that it's very relevant to choose the right partners to make sure that the whole thing works. I'm just wondering if, looking at companies and good examples, what the most important aspects that you learned that you have to think about it in terms of business ecosystems?
Yeah, I think maybe the most important part is to start by defining the ecosystem. So what is it we're talking about? Who impacts whom and how? And mapping that ecosystem so you can actually exclude some, but make sure you don't forget those that actually really matter to the changes that you've set out for. So I think I would use system mapping as a tool, or explore system mapping as a tool in that exercise. Not only value chain mapping, but actually a larger system. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Eugenio.
Thank you. And I think I was possibly jumping the gun a bit in terms of saying that you only had time for one more question. I think we can take another one. I want to just come back to something that Julianne asked when you asked the question about what the size of the opportunity was. Julianne asked a really interesting question in response to that. I don't know if you want to come on mic, Julianne, and ask your question. You can find it by scrolling back up.
Sure. I think I asked the question about how about the business risk of not addressing the crisis? Because we all know what the effects of climate change are going to be, even if we're on a 1.5 degree trajectory. Even worse if it's on a 3.5. We've all read those things recently or in the last few years. And that if a company does nothing, it will be a victim, just like every other company out there, of a changing world. So is that something that you manage to get business leaders to consider?
I think it's definitely part of the equation, but there is one challenge with that, and it is that business leaders tend to not see themselves in the same company for another 20 or 30 years. So I believe it has a limitation in connecting yourself to that potential threat and to that potential future. But I do believe that it is absolutely crucial to understand that if we don't have a well-functioning biosphere, we will not have a well-functioning society, and businesses will not be thriving. And sometimes, I believe that is left out of the equation. So if you can help bring that up, please do. I think that is absolutely crucial information. I don't have a figure on it, though, at this point. I think it's super interesting, though, Julianne.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was given some advice recently on engaging the financial sector with this, and was given the advice of looking at value and risk, because they're the two things that tend to engage them. And so that's the approach I've been tending to take, is talking about the value and the opportunity and talking about the risk of not doing anything.
Yeah, I've actually not addressed the financial sector very much at all, because you tend to get stuck in the value and risk discussion and the ESG metrics. And ESG metrics, as I've seen, tend to vary a lot between different stakeholders or different, those that actually do the evaluation. So I've tended to kind of not go into that direction. But I completely agree. If you come from a financial perspective, Hannah, which I think you do, it's definitely part of the equation to point out the risk and to point out the tremendous value that can be destroyed by not taking action. Mm-hmm. Now I come from a positive mindset, so I rather talk about opportunity and potential and human potential. But, I think all different perspectives are needed.
Brilliant. And that seems like a really good place to close this session. Thank you, Elisabet. It's been a really great way to, great first session for this Innov8rs Connect on climate and SDGs. So thank you very much. And thank you very much to all of you as well for being so engaged and for some great questions. It's been a really good session. Ines has shared the link to the next session in the chat, so please do join that one. And she's also shared the link to the social and discussion section on the platform. So please do keep the conversation going on there. And I know Elisabet was keen, please follow her on LinkedIn, please connect, reach out, read the book, visit her website. It's been a great conversation. Looking forward to seeing some of you again over the next couple of days. Thank you very much for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.